Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Iron Canon podcast, your home on the Star Wars Underworld podcast network for in-depth discussion on lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. My name is Matthew, and that is Joel, joining me from across the continent. Joel, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing okay. If I sound a little weird tonight, folks, I got a canker sore in the back of my mouth, so I got to deal with that. It's in the back of my tongue. But Writers Guild strong, as I will say. That's
There
still
we go.
going.
There you go. You gotta deal with canker. You gotta deal with me. Just kidding. Yeah, you gotta take care of it. Take care of your health. Go with some salt water. You do you. This week we are continuing our Ion Canon deep dive, all about canon, multimedia, and how different storytelling technologies connect the story of characters and lore in that one galaxy far, far away. Gonna get some plugs out of the way. First off, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Ion Canon Pod. Share some stories on Instagram as the kids do. Not so much any posts so much anymore, but yeah, Ion Canon Pod, EYEON CANONPOD. Also here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel, if this is where you're watching. We got YouTube memberships, we got super chats. Give us some love, give us some cashola, and we'll support the channel and support the podcast. And yeah, who knows, maybe some sort of something to do with an IHOP party sometime in the future. I can't promise anything. Dom and Ben and Chris, you didn't hear me say that. There we go. Yeah, Joel, do you want to talk about the Discord? Go for it.
Yes, you can join us on the Star Wars Underworld Discord this Friday. We are going to be playing Apex Legends for the first time. So join us there Friday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern on the Star Wars Underworld Discord. Oh, yeah.
That sounds like fun. I'll be on a plane, but that sounds like fun. I hope everyone enjoys themselves. The Discord is pretty great. It's pretty fun. Getting on conversations over there. All right, let's move on to this week in Star Wars. Joel, you had some thoughts on the Maker. Happy birthday to the Maker, of course, and the expanded universe.
Yes. I've always found, the whole thing about the expanded universe a little bit, what it meant, what the title meant with last week. I've always found George's relationship to the EU really fascinating because I feel like there's almost a difference between the man, George Lucas, and Lucasfilm, the company. And it's weird because 9 times out of 10, mostly, Lucasfilm, the company, is very much an extension of George Lucas's own will and his dreams and his desires and his sorry.
Especially when he was around, right?
Yeah. I mean, but George would go on and on about them books. That's not my vision. That's not how I would do it. That sort of thing. But the company Lucasfilm, they honestly never really made that much of a distinction between George's Star Wars and the rest of Star Wars. It was always just Star Wars. You get the Star Wars Essential Chronology back in 2007. It wasn't just here's 1 through 6 and that's it. It is, let's start with the Tales of the Jedi stuff, and then after Endor, all the X-Wing books are mentioned here. The Thrawn trilogy, the Yuzong Vong War, with New Jedi Order, that sort of thing. And then you get the 2011, the Essential Guided Warfare. It's like, here's all the stuff from Legends, here's the Clone Wars cartoon, here's the comic Clone Wars from 03 to 05, here's the New Jedi Order, here's how that war. So it's like, George constantly goes, oh, it's not my universe, not my. And then all the official Lucasfilm licensed stuff just kind of said, here's Star Wars. It's all Star Wars. We don't put, it's not like Star Wars Lucas's. Star Wars, man, Luke, it's just Star Wars. It wasn't until 2012 where they're like, okay, all that stuff minus the films and the series is now Legends. So I've always just kind of found it interesting. It's like George's own personal views never really matched up with Lucasfilm official policy until he left. And then, now it's kind of like, now it's sort of like, well, everyone's kind of working on the same page now. So I don't know. I just think that's always been kind of an interesting kind of weird kind of a thing of like, it's people who say, oh, it never can because George didn't consider it. And then it's like, but the company itself never really decided to distinguish it till 2012. And after they sold and just hard rebooted everything, kept keeping the.
Yeah. I was like, they have a job to do. Try not to upset them.
That too.
From my favorite film of all time. I think in terms, seriously, in terms of the specific tasks Lucasfilm Publishing, Lucasfilm Licensing was set out to do. George Lucas was the guardian of, well, the story he wanted to tell, whatever that was. And so, in 2008, he just says, okay, well, I'm gonna do my thing. It's all his money anyway, but in 2008 says, I'm gonna just pump all my money into this animated show with this teenage girl who happens to be Anakin's Padawan, and whatever continuity happened, whatever, that's fine. That being said, then Lucasfilm Licensing, they were the legal arbiters, legal guardians of the Star Wars brand and the Star Wars name. And so that has this fascinating, I mean, Star Wars, more than anything else, I think, had this branding kind of ecosystem, had this storytelling implications of what is canon, what is kind of the different tiers of canon in the books and comics and video games, etc. Because that's it. If it fits with at least the ethos of what George was saying, yeah, we'll give it the stamp of approval. We'll let you call it Star Wars. If it doesn't fit, then you have to call it Battlestar Galactica or something else.
If it fits, you don't quit.
Yeah, but then also to say, think of James Luceno talking about how there always was a story group in terms of the authors getting together and talking about how their stories might fit together. And Tim Zahn, I think, was probably part of that. I gather Karen Travis was part of that. Maybe Tom Veitch, and these big names in the 90s EU. Well, they called it the EU, I guess. But yeah, it's a different task, I think, in terms of for Lucasfilm Licensing specifically. And we know how protective they were of the Star Wars name, and yet there was a lot that they let in. So yeah,
and I'll just say one more thing. I've always found interesting, like, again, go back to George, in the 90s, despite George being like, I don't care about those books, well, he must have cared somewhat, because there were rules, like rule 1, don't mention the prequels. We're gonna save that in case George wants to do it one day. He was unsure, but he's like, I'm gonna save that. And don't kill off Luke and Leia. I don't know if that was an official rule or not, but that was definitely something that they never did anyway. But
they could kill Chewie. They could throw a moon on Chewie.
That was in 2000. That was later.
It was all later.
But yeah,
okay, fair enough.
But yeah, it's like, and I just sort of found it interesting. Like, George never like, go ahead, make prequel books, and I'll get to it, and I'll erase it all later. Like, no, he's like, do not touch the prequel era, or what would become the prequel era, because no one quite knew what it was at the time. So it's like, that does not touch it. That's why we don't have like EU books of like young Anakin adventures in the 90s. Like that was untouchable at the time. And then when Clone Wars 2008 came out, later newer EU books try to incorporate those details into the book, so you get a weird mishmash. But no, I just think that's just sort of an interesting kind of the almost chaotic nature where, I don't think George has to be a team player if he doesn't want to. It's his universe, his money. I just kind of interesting. It's like, I mean, you still kind of have that issue with some of the screen stuff for sure. But, it's like George did what he wanted, and then kind of everyone had to follow suit. And you still kind of have that. And we can get into that later with the films and stuff. It's maybe not as extreme for sure. But, no, I just think that's just sort of an interesting... It's always sort of... I always feel like the conversation around George Lucas and the EU is never as nuanced, and I think it should be.
Right.
Or could be.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to bring that up, and yeah, we will get to this later. But it seems like they're less strict about that kind of thing now. Maybe because all the films are done, but less strict about saying, "Okay, E.K. Johnston, you can write a book about Ahsoka in this time period," and then along comes Clone Wars season 7, along comes Tales of the Jedi, that kind of retcons a little bit or does something different. You can have a comic about Kanan and that whole story. Young Caleb Doom. So and I'm curious then, why because things seemed to be, or they seemed to be more tied in. Now they're less worried about people getting all up in arms. People did get all up in arms. I got all up in arms, and I got over it with the Canon thing. But they seem to be less worried about retcons and discontinuity when a screen thing overrides a paper, and so letting them try out an idea on paper that then work out on screen. I don't know.
I mean, I would argue that interconnectivity's actually got a lot better in the last decade.
Yeah.
And I'll go over that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, I just think it's sort of interesting. Lucas has this very nonchalant view of the books and comics and stuff,
That's true.
and yet he's like, and maybe it wasn't him personally, but like his legal team, his employers, maybe himself, like they set up rules.
Yeah.
They said you can't do that. They marketed it as like, no, this is just very much part of Star Wars, even though George will do his own thing. And George did use stuff. The name Coruscant first appeared in Tim Zahn's Heir of the Empire.
True.
I really want to know if like George came up with the name and gave it to Tim Zahn, or was who came up with the name? Like that's always been something I've always been kind of curious about. And he did give authors notes. It's not like he left them stranded. It's like sometimes people ask, "Hey, what's this about?" And then he would just write about like, "Oh, there's this." And there's like the rule of two kind of thing, and then authors would have to interpret kind of that in their own spin. And then obviously when the prequel came, then George kind of cemented that lore later on. But yeah, just it's interesting, and we'll get into that when we get into it.
Yeah, it is fascinating there. I mean, just again the seeming distance that he had with the other things, but like more along the lines of what Star Trek does. But very fascinating question. I won't steal too much of our own thunder from later us in the future. Well, how was my week? Two things. First of all, Saturday for Mother's Day weekend, I treated my mom to The Last Jedi in concert with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, showing the film, showing in Roy Thompson Hall downtown, not too far away from where Fan Expo was actually, showing the film on a big screen and the orchestra right there. And two things. This thing we saw Return of the Jedi there maybe last year, and that the difference with the orchestra seemed to stand out more. Maybe because I'm just more familiar with that film, that score over the years, but also to say, it was the afternoon showing. There was a lot more kids dropping cups, people whooping and hollering at different moments. So it was a fun experience there, a bit of a distracting experience, and yet maybe this is why I didn't pay as much attention to the orchestra. I was still so engrossed in this film. The Last Jedi to me is still a perfect film. Obviously, you can quibble about details, whatever, fine. It's still such a gripping, deeply thoughtful tale of heroism and good and evil, and letting the past die versus saving what you love and passing on what we've learned, including failure and everything. I was still in it, even if it was.
You said it's an orchestra. Are they playing the dialogue too, or is it just the music with pictures?
No, so it's the film, and what they have a special track where it's the dialogue, and on Canto Bight, the kind of lounge music that was also in the audio, but then the score is all live orchestra.
And, interesting.
Yeah,
very
really
interesting.
Great. And it's becoming. I mean, that's becoming a major thing in Star Wars now, and in fandom. I mean, they're doing Indiana Jones, they're doing Black Panther, they're doing Superman. So another John Williams score there. It was just stunning, just how even in a more distracting environment for me, and dealing with my ADD, ADHD, all that, still so gripped by it. I was struck with the music by the moments of silence, in terms of not just the Holdo maneuver. The Holdo maneuver, everyone applauded and kind of ruined the moment, but not really, because that's how this goes, is people cheer in certain moments and really appreciate, really loved the Holdo maneuver, didn't question it, didn't worry about it. Loved the film, didn't question it, didn't worry about it. Loved Luke in it, just different moments, like the Leia Force Skywalk, where John Williams himself pulls back, It says, I don't need to actually write any notes here. Those kinds of moments I was really struck by, because you could see them not doing anything. And that's also the thing, is it's the conductor was saying it's the longest, I mean, it's the longest Star Wars film, the most music, the hardest music of any Star Wars film. And yeah, I mean, it's the Toronto Symphony, they know what they're doing. So definitely worthwhile experience to do. Joel, you want to jump in with one more thought there?
Yeah, I just like I'm not as familiar. I'm not familiar with most of the sequel scores that much. I mean, granted, like to me, prequel music is kind of my thing. Where it's like, I know every score from General Grievous's little thing to do the Fate, Battle of Hero. So yeah, I mean that would be cool. I would love to experience something like that one day myself, if that ever happened near me.
Yeah, I mean, down I think they do have them a lot in the SoCal area. So yeah, hopefully you can. Yeah, and then the second thing, just last night I finally started wave 2 of phase 2 of High Republic Quest for Planet X, starting with by Tessa Gratton. And yeah, the Das and Rupert, that story, it's okay. I'm only a few chapters in, but it starts off with my girl Marta, great grandma. and so that always warms my heart, because just to see her, I mean, we know where she's going, we know her story's going. Even the Brickle Shell lines are a little harder. We know they're going to morph into the lightning strikes eventually, but just to see one of the best characters, definitely one of the best characters in all of High Republic, coming up to be one of the best characters in Star Wars in paper canon, I would say. So coming up to it, we need more time with her, and we're getting more time with her. So to see Tessa Gratton kick it off with our girl Marta, yeah, excited for that. I don't know. Have you done Quest for Planet X yet, or you're still?
No, I'm still doing Cataclysm.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, moving right along. I still haven't seen Visions. I've seen only one episode of Young Jedi Adventures, but Joel, you've seen. I mean, you've seen all of it already. You've seen all of Visions, right? And you've seen Young Jedi Adventures. So I will get to them.
I only saw a little bit of Young Jedi Adventures, but I did see all of Visions.
Yeah, I'm still working my way through. So what I'm doing instead is working my way through the playthrough of Jedi Survivor. So I'm going to spoil slightly if you haven't. Just got to the point where with Seer, and here was a really cool moment. Seer's master, what's his name?
Cordova?
Yeah, Cordova. That was cool. I did not expect to see him. That was great. And of course, Marin with her grand entrance in the saving Kel skin. Yeah, it was a good entrance. And just see, after reading, so I've finished Battle Scars, and seeing how Marin's gone off on her own adventure in life, how she's still able to have a tender relationship with Cal. So I don't know where that goes or how far that goes. The Cordova and Sears archives looks kind of like this, but we saw that from the trailer. But to see them underground with those Arcus monks, nuns, whatever, with these head coverings that look like Zepho, which is fascinating. And all those conversations, this whole Cal eavesdrops a philosophical lesson in the middle of a video game. I was pretty impressed by that. So I'm okay. The playthrough I'm watching on YouTube, it's okay. It's trying to, I guess, 100% everything, but it's only 17 hours. So I don't know. It does fast forward a few things, but and I do fast forward some things. But yeah, I'm enjoying it for the most part. We've mentioned this before, but Joel, what are your maybe non-spoiler thoughts on the Jedi Survivor story?
Oh, it's amazing. It's great. I think it's some top tier Star Wars storytelling for you, and I think it's gonna have implications of stuff about Star Wars down the line. So,
like you were saying with the Ahsoka and the orange lightsabers last week, the one thing I'm wondering about is it a little too gimmicky, like too many of these side quests that don't feel as integrated into the main story as they could be. I'll find out. I guess I'll find out. There we go. Have any further thoughts on anything I was on screen?
Nope. Go watch Visions. It's amazing.
I will. I promise. All right. So before we dive into, or as we dive into our main topic. I've got to bring this back up. We played this maybe over a year ago. I got to play this video. I'm calling an audible here. A little thing called the Canada Heritage Minute with Marshall McLuhan.
TV sucks the brain right out of the skull. So next seminar we'll probe the content of television.
Professor McLuhan,
Well, of course, the content of television is movies, but the message of television is what it does to us, the users.
Are you saying that the medium is more important than the message it carries?
No. The medium is not more important than the message. It's obvious. The medium is the message.
The medium is the message. What does that mean?
Well, of course, the medium is the message. It's what I...
He's full of great ideas.
Like print changed the shape of the world, people don't read newspapers, they get into them like a warm bath.
This Canadian changed the way the world thinks about communications.
Is the message, then the content must be the audience. And of course, electronic information is turning the world into a global village. Take light bulbs, they're an information medium.
All right. I know it was a cheesy way of doing about it, but let's bring this up yet again. Part of our Canadian heritage, Marshall McLuhan. But I guess we're going to go in a bit of a different direction of his. So, what happens if you go through different media in Star Wars? Revisiting this conversation from maybe a year or so ago. So, yeah, Joel, take it away. Multimedia of Star Wars.
Yes, Star Wars. Star Wars is a unique franchise, if ever there was one, when it comes to this. Now, every franchise, big, especially if they get big enough, they like to spread their wings outside of their original place of origin. Star Trek started on TV, then in the 70s and 80s, got some movies, and then, over time, like there's been Star Trek books, Star Trek comics, Star Trek video games, Doctor Who, same thing. There was a TV movie in the 90s that bombed. They never tried movies again. And there's a lot of Big Finish audio dramas. There's a lot of Doctor Who books. There's some Doctor Who comics. It's been passed around. Every big franchise kind of has this. DC, Marvel, obviously their comics, and they spread out the books. But there's actually not that many books. Well, sometimes you'll find books and movies and video games and whatnot. Star Wars is unique in that Star Wars always, even from the beginning, kind of cemented it that like, oh no, this is all one universe. This is just one thing. It isn't like, here are the books, the comics, it's all Star Wars. It's always been Star Wars, The Splinter of the Mind's Eye is a sequel to A New Hope because, it was going to be a sequel. But then they do young Han adventures in the 70s, lots of Marvel comics, and then in the 90s, obviously. And then I guess I'll get into the history. So this is the history. So I'll just give a brief history of kind of the evolution of multimedia in Star Wars before we kind of get into it. So, you have the first phase, I call it phase early period, was 77 to 83, where you get things like Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and then you'd get, the Han Solo adventures, the Marvel comics, kind of these things that were being, made alongside and after the movie because, got to capitalize on the popularity of Star Wars at the time, along with the toys. And I don't think there were video games, or maybe they were, and they were just like little arcade things.
I think I remember that linear arcade game. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Oh no, that's fine. And then you get, I call it the first real EU era. 91 to 99, Dark Empire and Heir of the Empire come out in books and comics respectively. Heir of the Empire was the more popular of the two, so the book kind of got to take over for being the post-Endor dominated storytelling. Comics decided to go back into the ancient past and tell the ancient times. The prequel era was not to be touched. No mentions really of the Clone Wars too heavily. That's saved for George later. And what's interesting about that time is there wasn't much of a coordination between books and comics at the time. Comics did their thing, books did their thing. It really was the exception. It was the exception, not the rule, that authors would reference other material. Thank Kevin J. Anderson and his Jedi Academy trilogy for wanting to bring in elements of Dark Empire, the Tales of Jedi comics, etc., and kind of make what the comics were doing and the books doing a little more interconnected, a little more interwoven. Otherwise, books and comics could diverge quite greatly in terms of like stories and kind of building a continuity within themselves. How popular was early Star Wars circa 77? I mean, it was a hit. It's like it was a phenomenon. Those toys paid for Empire, without them, it's like we get no Empire. So pretty popular. It was cultural zeitgeist in terms of like revolutionizing the blockbuster industry. I mean, I don't know, like Star Wars books and stuff at the time. I'm sure people bought stuff.
I mean, that's why they released them, right? I mean, that's the thing. Even going back to our conversation at the beginning, the reason you have Lucasfilm being these arbiters of the Star Wars brand is because it was super profitable to connect. I mean, not just the action figures, but yeah, I mean, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, the Marvel comics were hugely popular, and so yeah, I mean, it's the crass capitalist thing too, right? There's money to be made on these things, because folks like us who are all okay, we see a movie, we go to the theater, see a movie. Now what? What's next? What's more to the story? We're so enthralled.
Exactly. Then you get the second kind of EU phase, 1999, 2007. Prequels come out. So you kind of get this thing where it's like the books and comics kind of now trying to more align themselves with what the prequels are doing at the time. There's lots of prequel tie material, obviously. It's like, look at all the new Jedi characters we can talk about, a new era we can explore. Then Clone Wars hits like books and comics and games about the Clone Wars. Like, oh my God, we can tell all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And with the prequel kind of complete, sort of like New Jedi Order, the post-Endor big event that was wrapping up at the time. It's like had the Old Republic game still going in the ancient past, so it's sort of like kind of well-rounded.
Yeah.
And then I kind of skip a little bit because, like, I feel like
I want to jump in one thing in that in the first era that leads to the second era is Shadows of the Empire. We have to mention.
Oh right? Yeah. That was certainly an interesting little
like the experiment, the great experiment in both saying, okay, what if we had a film that we do want to actually have all these tie-in things to, and so all the push in 1999. It's why you're right to make that 1999, because 1999, The Phantom Menace comes out, and they want to capitalize on everything around that by having this extra story, all these extra stories that point back, including the Terry Brooks novelization, but also lots of comics and novels that came out.
I think there were comics even beforehand. The Republic comic were like kind of setting up the Phantom Menace era with like Kiadi Mundi, or Singh at the time.
And so you have that, but just before 1996, you have Shadows of the Empire. This story, interestingly, we're talking about this now, set in between Empire and Return of the Jedi, right?
Right.
And saying, okay, we have a novel, we have a comic run, a bunch, like 3 comic runs, I think. I believe involving Mara Jade somehow.
No,
not yet.
No.
Okay, maybe I don't know where I got that from. I'm gonna look that up. Shadows of the Empire Evolutions, I feel like, has something to do with her. I could be wrong entirely.
I mean, he might have appeared in one of the tie-ins things, but I don't remember her being part of the main story.
No, not the main story, but Shadows of the Empire Evolution, I think.
Oh, maybe.
Because I mean, she had already been, of course, in the Thrawn trilogy, and then the video game, which I think is the true to form, the biggest, most popular part of this. But all 3 stories in 3 different media that interconnect, and it was the great experiment that was wildly successful. And of course they replicated it. You throw a film in there in 1999, and we're sitting pretty with the EU.
Yeah. Then you got Clone Wars in 2008. But the next real era really is 2013 to present day. I mean, maybe you can divide it even more, but I'm just gonna keep it here for now. To simplify it and we don't go on forever. Where it's a hard reboot. Star Wars, the continuity. It's like, okay, the only thing that counts are 1 through 6 and the Clone Wars cartoon. And now they're gonna build up a universe based on those things. And now we're here in books, comics, but now in video games, but now we're including more movies and TV shows, streaming. So that is kind of the history of the multimedia of Star Wars. And this is, I would argue that this era in particular is their most, as they've evolved over time, this is probably their most biggest way to get more interconnected, to make it feel cohesive and whole. And not that it wasn't before; they were trying harder with every decade. Like I would say, the EU era of 1999, 2007, they're getting more and more and more. Where it's like you start saying, say Captain Pelion was there during the Clone Wars, and Mara Jade was around during the original trilogy, and Thrawn was around during the prequel era. So, with stuff like Outbound Flight. So, trying to just kind of intersect all that. And, well, now we're here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I think it kind of makes kind of the first real question I asked is Star Wars a movie franchise? And it's like, well, yes, George probably, because I think that's what he cares about. But Star Wars, Star Wars is Lucasfilm as a company is always sort of, Star Wars is IP. It is books, comics, video games, coffee table mugs, flamethrowers, merchandising. That's where the real money comes from. So and I think even more so in a way than I would argue. Like I would argue, Star Trek is more of a TV franchise because I don't think it prioritizes other things as much in terms of like books, comics, and video games and movies. Doctor Who, same thing. It's like Doctor Who still is the BBC TV show. I mean, they got some lucrative toys and stuff for sure, but I think Star Wars, in a weird way, can survive without films for a while. As we see now, as we saw in the 90s, we saw in 2005 to 2015, where it's like, definitely movies help give it that shot in the arm for sure to kind of get it in the public eye. But sort of like, Star Wars can be just toys and merchandising. Movies definitely add a lot more new stuff to it so that they can make toys and merchandising on. But
I'm in the right room for that.
So am I. I mean, look at this. Look at all this. But I think not in the way like if Star Trek doesn't have TV shows. I think Star Trek is quiet. I mean, I'm sure there's Star Trek books that were going on before the next big wave of TV shows or the Abrams boom in 2007. But like, I mean, I'm not in the Trek fandom, so I could be. But I feel like and to be fair, movies do and TV shows do this for Star Wars too. But I feel like Star Wars kind of has more of a diverse palette of other things it can kind of live off of for a long time, where I don't want to get too much into like rumor conspiracies and tinfoil hats, but like I think that's one of the reasons why Lucasfilm is okay not having a movie. Like I think I've always believed if Lucasfilm wants a movie, like we want a movie now in 2025, although that might be still happening, like they would do it come heck or high water. They'll move mountains, they'll
Malachor high water, Malachor Camino,
Malachor and
Malachor and Camino.
They'll fire 20 directors and hiring 20 more. Every scene is directed by a different director.
That'd be so funny. From a certain point of view, it would be a screen version from a certain point of view.
Exactly, but it's still telling a cohesive story. They I think they would do that, but I think the fact that things have kind of petered out, and stuff like that, or like just fallen through. I think it's less. I mean, bad luck is bad luck. But I think it also is just a sign of what they're like. What, we're fine. We're okay right now. We want to wait for whatever X amount of reasons. We're scared. The movie industry is not that great. Writer's strike, whatever. So I think Star Wars can survive that, and whereas something like a Star Trek or even a Doctor Who, well, maybe Doctor Who survives still, but it's like they won't die. I'm not gonna say Star Trek's gonna be dead because there's no more TV shows or a movie or anything. But it's gotta be even more of a quiet kind of rest.
Yeah. I'll respond to all of that.
Yeah, go ahead. I talked about Star Trek, so I'm curious.
Well,
I hope I'm...
but your point about Star Trek has got me thinking about Star Wars. So Yeah, the 2009 films, the Abrams films, it did feel like a lull, and then with the resurgence, the question was what is the default? What is the first place we're going to go when we're making new Star Trek stories? And the answer was TV, was Paramount Plus, streaming, whatever it is. In 2012, with Star Wars, the question is, sorry, in 2012, the question was, where are we going to write new Star Wars stories? The default was films, for the time being, from 2015 to 2017. I think by 2017, however, we know this for a fact, that was starting to change, and that they were starting to say, oh shoot, we spent all this money on this film that people like me think is perfect and completely worth every penny, but some people are like, not my Luke, and all this nonsense.
I think Solo was what did more than Last Jedi, if you ask me.
Sure, and then they tried to do the Marvel thing with 2 films a year and all that. They said, no, we're going to now say where we're going to invest all of our resources and time. What is the default for a new Star Wars story? To my mind, the default of a new Star Wars story is Disney Plus streaming. It is make a 6-episode film with different directors, 7, 8, 9 episode, whatever, 10 episode film, series, however you want to do time jumps, whatever it is. Maybe even make it more episodic. I don't know. That is where we're going to go. I keep coming back to this. Where has it since 2019? What has delivered versus what hasn't? TV, Disney Plus has delivered. Films haven't. Where are all the announcements, the concrete announcements that we very much are very sure as we can be, writer strike pending, that will come about? It's the Disney Plus shows. I still got the Hannah rule with the films, even the 2025 film, even the Filoni film. I'm still, let's show me when the credits are rolling, or when the crawl is rolling, or whatever it is. Got my Mars bar in my hand. So that's the question. What's the default? I will say, then, going back though, is in 2005, 2006, George was saying, I want to start telling the story about the Clone Wars. Whenever it was, does he say, let's make a film? Yeah, he makes this animated film, but really he said, no, let's make a 20-minute.
Remember, it wasn't supposed to be an animated film. It was like a last-minute change.
Right. It is 3-4 episodes stuck together. Let's make an animated show. It already, by 2005, was already starting to become the default. The 1313 show, all that. I think Star Wars has been a TV first thing for a while now, and I know it's an odd way to think of it. Maybe that's a Joel Davis style incendiary take that I need to think a bit more on. But
I mean, I'll say,
I mean?
I agree. I think Solo more than Last Jedi, if you ask me.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Was the real, like, remember, at the end of the day, Last Jedi made some big money. Solo bombed. Like, and I don't, Solo like truly bombed if you count, like marketing, what they probably had to do the reshoot. It probably did not make its money back. And there's some other things as well. We got to consider, the change in just the industry, Disney itself wanting to make Disney Plus their flagship for a while. Yeah, COVID, big one. COVID's the big one for sure. That's changing just in general. From what I hear, there is a shift to try to go back to theatrical as more the default for sure. I think Lucasfilm internally very much likes Disney Plus, and that's sort of their safe space. And I think they're still a little cautious about after Solo bombing and like, we're gonna make $1 billion. It's like, to them, it's like Disney Plus is our safe space. So I think they're happy being on Disney Plus for a while.
I will say, I mean, it's something I've said a few times before: the storytelling potential, the potential to kind of appease fans by taking the time to explain things. Fans who maybe Solo might have needed more time to explain some things. Rise of Skywalker needed more time to explain some things. Maybe Last Jedi too. I don't know. I don't think so, but imagine if that took the time of a series of a TV series. And then, of course, I think kind of your point, what you were saying also is that even if there is no screen canon, there are things like what Shadows of the Empire or are the Shadows of the Empire of our time, High Republic, even more so. I mean, I should put it the other way. Shadows of the Empire is the High Republic of the 90s. Now it's the other way around because of how much, I mean, it's not as financially viable, sure, but you go to any celebration now, the last two celebrations, High Republic has been massive, and the love for it has been massive. And yeah, you talk about this interconnected story that is drawing a fan base around it. You go on Twitter, you see countless accounts of people and Instagram, people dedicated to High Republic characters specifically, and trying to find Elzar stolen concept art and all that. Yeah, it's so yeah, I do get your point. I think they're okay with it not being films because they're because of Disney Plus, but also because all these books and the High Republic books over there doing such a bang up job. So
yeah, I mean, I think Lucasfilm is, I mean, again, the industry's changing, so they might be pressured to put in some films. I do wonder, though, I do kind of wonder if George thought Star Wars was defaulting to TV by the end.
I think so.
Probably.
Well, I know it. I'm convinced of it, frankly. But
I mean, we know he was at least going to start with a 7, 8, 9, then he sold. So, because Underworld was just not coming up to snuff for a whole bunch of reasons. Technologically, it was a big bunch of reasons. The Great Recession hit Lucasfilm pretty hard. That's something not a lot of people talk about. Like Great Recession, man, 2008, Lucasfilm lost a lot of money, and they lost some resources along the way. So,
yeah,
like
that's
George
true.
George kind of worried, like, oh, how am I going to pay my employees? Hey, good for him, man. Wants to keep people in work.
We're getting High Republic Disney Plus series coming up. So
That's
exactly.
true.
So
that's true.
Speaking of moving things between multimedia and all that, anyway.
We'll get there. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of the first big question.
Mm-hmm.
And now the second kind of the big question and the big topic is sort of, something that we enjoy as canon junkies.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I talk a lot about that's not what storytelling is about, but it's still fun when you can do it. Is when you weave the characters through the different mediums, like when Saw Gerrera first pops up in Clone Wars in 08, then he pops up again in Rogue One in a live action movie and dies, and then he pops back up again in Rebels before he died, and then he popped up later in Jedi Fallen Order. He shows up, and then he's in Andor a couple episodes. So, that stuff like that we just enjoy because it's fun. He's a character, he's part of the galaxy. He is a staple of a specific era of Star Wars storytelling. So I think that's something interesting. But I think, and it's kind of, I know I have a bunch of stuff here, but I feel like these next two topics are kind of intersected. Yeah. I think it's all about framing. And I think sort of Saw is a unique character of Saw appears in all these different stories and all these different mediums, but these aren't Saw Gerrera's stories. Right. Andor's story. It's just Saw's involved in it via Lucen, who's one of the main characters. He appears in Rebels, but that's Ezra's and Ghost Crew's story ultimately. Rogue One is Jin's story, so we see Saw through her eyes. Kind of, then, in Jedi Fallen Order, that's Cal's story. So I think, and this is where, and that's where Saw's interesting. And then I think what's interesting is we have these two shows, Mandalorian, and we're going to have Ahsoka.
Yeah.
And I guess you can say Book of Boba Fett kind of, well, let me use these two, but Mandalorian and Ahsoka. So you got Mandalorian, especially season 2. We have all these characters show up. And again, it's all about framing because every time they show up, I know people say, oh, it's distracting, but I kind of challenge you to think, is it distracting because you're a Star Wars fan? Yeah. I think if it is, then I think honestly, that's a good sign because you have to look at it from someone who's no idea who any of these people are. Like, look at how, like the Ahsoka episode, when Ahsoka meets Din, that entire episode, for the most part, is all about Din's perspective. How does Ahsoka affect Grogu, which affects Din? And then, Din, Ahsoka's just, hey, you're one of them Jedi folks that I have been told is going to help my baby out. Help my baby out? No. Can you help me out find someone who's going to help my baby out? Sure. Okay, sounds good. Oh, wait, before you go, can you help me with this thing? Sure. And then Din helps her with the thing. There's a little bit, you cut through the Ahsoka, it's like, where is Grand Admiral Thrawn? But it's like, what's wrong with a little intrigue? Like, oh, maybe someone was going to be interested in her. Maybe that's intriguing for someone.
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with a little setup? People can still benefit when your setup's a little bit, even though I think the story still did well. Even when Boba Fett shows up, sure, you get some scenes of Boba doing his Boba stuff. It's like, he then, it goes back straight to Din. Grogu gets captured. Boba's like, I'll help you. It's like, thank you. Let's go. We need some help. And then, we get in the Slave One and go rescue Grogu. So it's all about Din. It's all about Din's perspective. So the Ahsoka series, I think, is fascinating because you're going to have a series in a different medium. I know it's still screen canon, but with live action Star Wars medium, which is a sequel to 2 animated series of which Ahsoka, Rebels and Clone Wars, which Ahsoka has popped in. Obviously, this is essentially Rebels season 5 for all intents and purposes. The continuation of that story, and I just think it's fascinating that we're going to have this show under the principle of it continue a story directly from a different medium. Same author, same creative, Dave Filoni writing it, so you kind of get that connective tissue for sure.
Yeah.
But different medium telling another portion in 2 very different mediums. Granted, still on screen, but I just think I just think it's fascinating.
The Uncanny Plateau. Take a swig of water while I jump in there. Yeah. So I'll talk about Saw first. And what's really fascinating about him? Yeah, great point. He's never shown as his own story. We first see him as part of Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka, and her thing with Lux going on, and with them training this terrorist group to take on the Separatists, right? What's really fascinating with Saw, why he works so well in the Rebel era, is because he's always this foil, this more extremist foil, especially to Mon Mothma, and that's true in Rebels. It's true in Rogue One. Yes, Rebels is Ezra and the Ghost Crew story. Rogue One is Jin's story, but Saw really works to present this devil on the shoulder, saying, you can devil shoulder versus Mon Mothma. You can take no prisoners. It doesn't matter what kind of moral lines you cross. You're going to take them out. And then, of course, in Rogue One, towards the end, he's lost his mind, and his ability to grasp reality has been eaten away. We see that starting in Andor, especially. So yeah. Well, and Andor, of course, also again a foil to Mon Mothma. He always. There's kind of this weird dance that the 2 of them are constantly going on throughout. Neither of them, of course, showing up in their own stories yet, right? We know Ahsoka is going to be in Mon Mothma. Mon Mothma is going to be in that, but that's later after Saw's dead. What's fascinating about Ahsoka, you talk about it being season 5 of Rebels,
and season 100 of Clone Wars at this point.
I'm gonna say it's in a deeper sense. It is season whatever of Clone Wars. It is that because if we're thinking about framing here, again, Rebels is Ezra, Sabine, Hera, Kanan, the Ghost Crew, Zeb, and Chopper. That's their story specifically, and especially Ezra's. And so when Ahsoka shows up there, it's almost as a foil for Maul in a way. It's a companion to Kanan in Ezra's development. In the Mandalorian, well, that's actually a good point. In the Mandalorian, it is reaching back and thinking back to, I guess her experiences in the Siege of Mandalore. You think back to the moment in Rebels in the Lothal Temple where she realizes her master is Darth Vader, her former master is Darth Vader. Why this is why she isn't willing to train Grogu. Sorry, my monitor is doing something weird right now. I don't know why it's doing that. Sorry. Yeah, it's all about framing there in the foil. We know, that's first of all also a great point. Why do I get distracted? Because I'm so invested in as a Star Wars fan. I want Plo Koon's ghost to say, "Hey, I would have trained Grogu. He would have stayed with me." But that's another story. That's a funny. Here's the thing about Ahsoka, about the series, is, Clone Wars. Yes, it was Rex's story. Yes, Anakin and Obi-Wan are in it. It is Ahsoka's story.
Oh, yeah.
So Ahsoka is now getting a second main story for herself, and it does show how compelling she is. I do wonder, and what I've said before about this second show at the end of season 5 of Clone Wars is this real struggle of where is my place in the Jedi. And even in season 7, with the Martez sisters, she's still struggling with where is my place among the Jedi. With Luke training Grogu, she's standing off. She's, in the family, but recognizing Anakin and Luke, but still, again, off doing her own thing. And then again, just like at the end of season 5 of Clone Wars, and in this Ahsoka show, I think it's going to come to a head. Where do I fit? Where do I stand when it comes to this thing, this tradition, this overwhelming weight of millennia of what the Jedi were? And and with the droid, the lightsaber droid, blanking on his name. Yeah, that guy. Let's begin again. Shall we begin again? We don't quite know what specifically, but it's the deeper questions. Yes, it's with the characters of Rebels, but the deeper questions that she's facing as a Padawan. Of course, that's what you face: is where's my place in this? Rey in The Last Jedi, where's my place in this? Ahsoka from a more mature adult perspective, but long after everything's fallen apart and fallen away, is going to start asking this again anew, with the ability to actually make her place. And that's the difference, is that even in season 7 Clone Wars, even in Rebels, she was definitely making her place and making her way. But now that everything is gone, she can definitely make her way. And so again, I talk about taking the time, having all these episodes to focus on this one question, with Thrawn being the foil and these orange saber folks being the foil, providing the drama. The orange Jedi. Let's call them orange Jedi.
Okay, we'll call them orange Jedi.
Orange popsicle Jedi, creamsicle Jedi.
Orange Jedi.
Yeah, it's the character question that does continue through, but because she's a grown up, because she's older, it has a different weight to it.
Yeah, and I guess I'm thinking about this in terms of mostly principle, less so execution. Like, we can talk about Uncanny Plateau and maybe Harris costume didn't look that great. That's a production thing. It'll look good. You'll like it or you don't.
It is a multimedia transition thing, but
sure. Some of it's gonna be, some of it they just didn't transition it well, or sometimes it's like, it's fine, or you just have to kind of get used to it. Kind of stupid shit. Kind of the biggest execution thing for me is less the look. Although there are some looks I like more than others, but it's more Mandalorian season 1 and 2 in particular for me. Mm-hmm. They were such good jumping on points for just people who probably have like a baseline understanding of Star Wars. With Din just kind of being such a good protagonist to kind of like, he's your eyes in. So when you meet kind of the big names like Boba, like Ahsoka, kind of you learn about the Star Wars-ness of it all. You're learning about it through him.
Yeah.
Even Bo-Katan, I think in season 3, to some
Yeah.
parts. Yeah. Well, all right, my quibbles and all, but that I think that people came for Din and Grogu adventures, and I think they are a good vessel. I mean, I think they have their character arcs too, but they are good vessels for people who
aren't as familiar.
Yeah. Ahsoka is going to be based off of a gazillion seasons of two animated shows. And I guess in a weird way we already have this with Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi, so I'm not quite sure why. I'm getting weirded out by it a little bit. Although I guess Book of Boba Fett was weirdly both a spin-off to the movies and Mandalorian, and this is also this is a 3-way spin-off. It's a continuation. It's a spin-off of the Mandalorian, but it's also Filoni continuing this sort of grand meta story he's been telling since 2008 in a different medium. And I guess for me, kind of the question of sort of telling this grand narrative in 3 chunks and it's still screen canon, so I'm a little more forgiving of it.
Sure.
But it'd be like, imagine if George Lucas had told the prequel, sequel, and original trilogy, but it's like, well, I'm gonna make the original trilogy in films, and then I'm gonna write the sequels as novels, and then for the sequels, I'm gonna write them as comic books. And here you go. This is my Star Wars Mag saga. You got 3 films, a bajillion comics, and 3 books. And they all tell one big story. And it's sort of like I just both a combination of execution and just sort of like, well, how do you I guess High Republic's kind of doing that, but still books and comics. And
and for some people would say they're struggling with it. I don't find it, as I've just read everything, but
they still have to pay individually for each movie. Disney. I'm more forgiving of the Disney Plus stuff because at least it's all in there. I pay for my yearly subscription.
Yeah, that's true.
I can watch Clone Wars Rebels and sort of like get
it's
caught
just
up.
The time invested. Yeah.
But I gotta ask myself, and I'm curious about less Filoni's own headspace because he can say stuff, but it's like, how does it come across regardless? Of like, when I watch this, am I gonna watch this being like, is someone who's just watching the Ahsoka show gonna feel lost? It's like, I think there's a difference between feeling lost and feeling intrigued, because I think you can't feel it's like you fought in the Clone Wars and like, oh, what's the Clone Wars? It's like, well, it wasn't new in 1977, but like, oh, that's intriguing compared to I'm lost. Clone Wars, what now? I mean, if you're getting lost about that, then I think you're just not paying attention.
Yeah.
But I do think there is something. There is ways to kind of almost come off too much like people know what you're talking about, but they don't. It's like, here's an odd example, but it's like an expert of something can sometimes not be the best explainer for something because they're so ingrained in what they know that when you're telling it to a newbie or a novice, it's like they almost expect you to know what you don't know, but it's like you don't know what you know.
Yeah.
So it's like, I do worry sometimes with something maybe like this is like, is it going to come off too much like the expert of, telling a novice what they should know or not? And, here, Sam the Shan.
I think this is the opposite concern a little bit. Is it going to just have to explain everything, bogged down exposition? Or, I mean, Samuel, let us know if you think, is it going to be just laden down and bogged down in exposition? Is that a concern because it's going to take too much time away from story? Or is it concern it's going to be talking down to the audience? Which is also,
you can do both. Like, it takes away from story and you're talking down.
Yeah.
Like, why? Like, because I think, that's always like, that's never fun. It's like in the days of old, like like Bo-Katan stopping, like in the days of old, in the times. 5 minutes later, and then the great Mrs. Sword did the like.
Yeah, I'm here for it, but
I know, but like I mean, I do think I'd be curious to see how it'll balance under-explaining, over-explaining, and obviously showing don't tell.
I've
talked too much. I'll let you.
Well, I mean, what is true is I do have my paper canon, screen canon thing. It's all screen. And I think Dave Filoni thinks that way as well. I mean, that's why he's willing to carry on this story. I think, yeah, but a lot of people say no. That's the animated shows. My parents just don't really want to watch Clone Wars. They just want to watch these cool white lightsabers and this compelling character do her thing as she is. You know, yeah. It's this question of they make this distinction: live action versus animation, and for them, for very understandable reasons, animation doesn't feel as real to them as live action does. The reasons for that are obvious, but we're just Star Wars fans, so we actually kind of we can go down into down from uncanny plateau, and for me it's a weird thing, maybe because I am a Star Wars fan, that seeing Sabine live action or seeing Ahsoka live action is less real because I'm so used to her animation and Ashley Eckstein and all that. But yeah, that's a great point that a lot of people don't. And so, yeah, I think the way there's two examples, I think, of how it's done. Well, it was done really well. You raised it in 1977. Your father fought the Clone Wars. You fought in the Clone Wars. Then it was just backstory. And I think there's a way of describing things incredibly economically that yeah, so I'll just say, yeah, there's a lot of backstory to catch up audiences up on, but it turns out that Luke and Ben in the hut turned out to be plenty of backstory, and I know it's written in the different direction that can affect things, but I think there's a way of describing it incredibly economically that will, yeah, like I said, get people more intrigued than confused, and it'll feel like backstory. Because we get that all the time. That happens to us. We watch news stories all the time, and there's backstory that isn't main story until they realize, oh, we want to make money off of this, and so we're gonna make it main story. Or like we were saying before, George Lucas in the mid '90s comes along saying, hey, this thing's picking up. I want to actually tell this story because I've decided, the story of the Clone Wars and the Rise of the Empire is part of my main story now. There's a way of doing it. I think the way with everything with Bo-Katan in season 3, really, it felt familiar in that this is the character we know from Clone Wars and Rebels, but people weren't lost. People who hadn't seen Clone Wars and Rebels weren't lost in saying, okay, this is a character with a past, or with a pretty violent, difficult past, who is now standing in her own, even if they don't know what that past is. So
yeah,
I trust them. I trust Filoni to know what he's doing. There's also the potential, though, to say, kind of like Joel, what we do with this podcast, we go deep dives, to say, is Ahsoka going to be the show more for Star Wars fans than others? When you have Skeleton Crew and Mandalorian having the wider appeal, just maybe like The Last Jedi was trying to be the movie for Star Wars fans, and it succeeded for some and failed for others. But the intra debates didn't actually land didn't matter for the wider audience. But
I mean, if you're telling a good forward momentum story, I think it doesn't matter. Like, that's sort of my, like, I think, it'd be like, people didn't need the prequels in 77 to 83 to get the original trilogy, and then George made the prequels later. And does it enrich the originals? Well, yeah, but it's like, people were confused. My biggest issue with Mando season 3 is honestly the forward momentum story myself. I feel like if that was just stronger, I wouldn't feel lost. I mean, I didn't feel lost, but, so, like, if we're telling a good forward momentum story of, like, here's a character called Ahsoka, and she's depressed, and by the end, she's not depressed anymore, and she realizes her place, but, obviously, there's this evil guy named Thrawn, he's back. And just, like, stuff like that. We got a lot of comments. I
mean, one more thing I want to say. I mean, a similar question. I'd be really curious to hear all the people who played Jedi Fallen Order without knowing much about Clone Wars or even Revenge of the Sith and Order 66. because what we know with video games, it's by far the most popular medium. I'm curious, everyone with Jedi Survivor, I think I said this last week, all the folks who had never heard of High Republic and haven't cracked open a Star Wars book in their life, and now think High Republic, what's this High Republic? How they react. And yeah, it's also doing a great job of being economical and saying, okay, here's this thing that's happened a couple centuries before, being very economical with it. Fallen Order had flashbacks, yes, very economical, short, not letting people get lost in them, get lost in the Order 66, and the context of all that, the inhibitor chips, and none of that shows up, but it's still gripping and compelling. There's in it, they still feel it. Also, the thing with video games is it has the time to explore character, and that's what Jedi Fallen Order did. That's what Jedi Fallen Order did so wonderfully. Is how does Cal experience this recollection of the past and of his pain and his suffering in the past, and what does that mean for him going forward? This is why I think the best thing they can do for all this, the best of both worlds, is for Ahsoka to revisit that moment where she's framed because her supposed close friend Barasafi decided to set off a bomb in the Jedi hangar, and she's being framed because the Jedi trying to make nice with the Republic and all that context. The point being, how did she feel about that, and how does that affect her decades later? I think that would be the best way. That's my point, is what does it matter for her in the present timeline? Why does that matter? That's something anyone can connect to, anyone can latch onto and say, here's the story going forward in a different medium, in a more mature, darker medium. And that's the thing about live action, is that you can be, I mean, Andor showed this. Sorry, I'm trying to get a sneeze. Andor showed this. You can be a little darker, a little grittier. Mandalorian season 3 can be a little more engrossing, faster, more intense. Kenobi also showed this as well. Then say animated, then even the prequels with the Coruscant sheen, with that all gone. It can be more introspective and quiet, even if it's space lizards with laser swords, creamsicle laser swords. But
there's a couple good points though.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of backstory to catch it, like how Ezra knows the Force, how Sabine has the lightsaber. I am curious how they're going to introduce all the Rebels characters, which outside of Zeb, we got like Zeb's cameo was. I mean, that's what I love about Zeb's cameo. It's like thinking you miss it. It's like oh cool.
Like is that Zeb? Is that Zeb? Or that's just
I always like that too. I was like, is that another line? Like no, that's Zeb. Like how do you kind of get a? I guess I'm kind of curious how they communicate the weight of Sabine losing her friend Ezra, but also convey it to someone who never watched an episode of Rebels in their life.
It's how you do it. You do it through character. You do it through Natasha Liu performance of a friend she hasn't seen, she's lost and hasn't seen in a while. Things that are relatable to so many way more people. That's how you do it, and I think that's how they're hopefully going to do it.
I guess when we talk about this concern, I guess maybe the difference is maybe Filoni won't hold the audience's hand. I think sometimes maybe he won't decide to maybe he's like, you know what? Yeah, I mean, obviously, I do think there is not holding the audience's hand too much, but just sort of like having such a narrow audience, like. But if you're a good enough storyteller, I think you don't have to hold the audience's hand too much and like, this is Sabine. She is a Mandalorian. She wears paint because she's a hippie. She wears Mandalorian armor because she's a hippie. Like, just kind of, and I guess the framing of it as well. Like, it is called Ahsoka, so I guess everything in some ways has to be from Ahsoka's point of view. So you're framing everything from her perspective, as well. So. Like with the Mando, I guess it's kind of like introducing the Rebel characters again through her eyes, depending on like how if you're cutting to different characters, and stuff like that. Before I forget, I didn't want to make this too much of the Ahsoka speculation video, but it's sort of funny. You and I doing this podcast when we started, last year compared to like a couple years ago. If you had talked to me a couple years ago, we did this podcast pre-Solo. I think probably should have seen this coming with Rogue One, but pre-Solo, I was way more skeptical of them adhering to anything the animated stuff did. Like I was way more like, oh, are they even gonna acknowledge that stuff happened? And then Darth Maul came back and like, oh, damn. And then obviously, I think Filoni's kind of got himself promoted to in a big way going to live action. It's like, well, now all that stuff's kind of coming into the writer fold. So yeah, it's all on equal. It's all on equal footing now. But it's like, it's a concern. I get it, but I think you're right. It's if you can tell it in a properly way, then
I could be wrong, but I think if there's anyone who's aware of this concern, it's going to be Dave Filoni.
Or maybe Filoni does know that his audience, what his audience is, and he's okay with more of a Star Wars-y audience.
I mean, if they're okay with having a smaller viewership for this show, which it might be, given what we've heard a little bit of just how out there and strange it is, and how it goes for the deeper weird stuff in Star Wars, Mortis-esque, almost World Between Worlds-esque. I haven't heard too much details, but I think you've heard more. But that's another option, possibilities. They don't worry about the ones folks who haven't seen these shows.
It's actually kind of funny though. You mentioned that Last Jedi with the Star Wars film being the one for Star Wars fans.
Yeah.
All the people I know who love Last Jedi don't honestly care about Star Wars that much. So it's like,
I think what I mean there is they calculated here, and Rian Johnson was saying, I'm gonna engage in this intra fandom debate.
That is fair.
And it turned out a debate over what is a Star Wars hero, and that is something you and I could debate on this podcast or whatever, discuss. I think we agree, but what is the legacy of Luke Skywalker? This very nerdy debate that literally he puts in the film with Luke and Rey, in the second lesson, right? And so that's kind of what I meant, and then it backfired in terms of all of us fans who are so invested in it, having our particular view of what Luke Skywalker's legacy should be, and how we didn't see that reflected on screen, and so people got all up in arms. And then, but then those of us who loved just how it processed it, worked through it. How Luke himself works through it.
It is Rey, the most meta Star Wars ever.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It is a very meta Star Wars film that I think a lot of wider audience fans were all, oh, this is really a really interesting question of what's a hero in pop culture, period.
I guess
in society,
And I guess I'll say there's a difference between meta and I think more, it's like, and now Ahsoka and Yu Yang are on the planet Korriban. Here in the ancient times, Sith Lords like Naga Sadao and Freedom.
Fan service. There's the fan service question.
Did their thingies, and then it's like we're gonna spend 20 minutes talking about Korriban. Why is it important? It's like, what does that have to do with Ahsoka's story? Like, what's her journey here? That again, the human element is the key.
Then they can release a source book for all of us to go buy and read if we want.
Exactly. I don't wrong. I want like exploration of like different force powers and stuff, but all in the service of like, what is Ahsoka's journey here? Like, again, Kenobi. Kenobi is the story of a guy dealing with his trauma, and then by the end of the story, he's overcome his trauma and he's ready to move on with his life. What am I going to give? But I guess we're here to another thing. We talked about framing. We talked about my cynicism until Solo was like, okay, now that I'm now confident that at least animated stuff is going to be fine. But let's talk about like parameters and stuff like that. Just kind of the interesting nature. Again, we talked about Ahsoka, which is interesting. But I also think it's interesting because, again, Filoni's just telling his same story that he's been telling since 2008 now, just a different medium. We don't really see stuff like that happen too much because, for the most part, different creatives, let's say creatives, I'll include authors in there too, tend to stay in their genuine field. We're seeing more of jumping between TV and streaming and movies for sure. But Charles Soule does books and comics. He's not doing movies yet or TV yet.
I was about to say he's on his way. He's actually doing TV.
That's awesome
for Undiscovered Country, and for some of his other books are in.
Oh, epic!
Like he's in his creator own. So I think he's actually the one who's going to make the jump, because he's going to anyway. But generally speaking, I do think I see what you mean.
It's like, but I'll be interested, like how far will Star Wars ever take this? I mean, especially when it comes to because let's look at Kira. Here's a story character who started out in Solo, because Solo didn't really do that great. They continued her story in comics, but would we? I mean, I think it'd be fascinating myself. But would we have a day where Charles Soule is the showrunner of a Kira story, but it's a continuation of the story in the post-Endor era, and it's a continuation of his Crimson Saga, which is sort of like you're now continuing a character story in a comic that's from a comic book. Because normally, it's like, it's one thing, I guess, to kind of different characters. I'm focusing a lot on characters kind of having certain eras of their life told in different mediums. Like their youth was in movies, and their midlife days are in comics, and their older years
was in animation, and now her later adulthood is in live action.
I mean, in some ways, yeah. I guess her partial adulthood was in Rebels too, but I guess most of her adulthood is going to be in live action for sure. So you kind of have, I think, in a weird way, it is kind of that original prequel sequel thing where there's so much in chunks that there's enough degrees of separation where they can still kind of stand on their own, and then obviously when you put them all together, you get the wider whole, and you get a more richer experience for sure. I think, like Ahsoka should kind of be, it's part of the wider whole, but still a chunk of enough of her life to kind of still work and stand on its own as an individual story of the story
of a moment in her life.
Yeah. And, with Kira, you have the movie, which is a particular moment in her life, and then the Crimson Saga spans a particular moment in her life. It'll be curious if, she makes another jump. And depending on, like I said, if we get the wild card of like, oh, Charles Soule is now doing a TV show continuing that would be, interesting, or someone else. I don't know. But it's like,
I have 2 points to say about that. First of all, I was actually surprised that she didn't die off in the Crimson Saga. I mean, with the saying this is the end, all that. I didn't mind it. I enjoyed just anonymous in a bar, watching the news about Endor, saying, "Oh, I had something to do with that," but it was this bittersweet ending. I mean, so clearly, maybe there's a note, or I mean, Charles Soule just understood you can't kill her off to let her do something else. Again, just in case. Where's this thing? The High Republic TV series. I genuinely wonder, everything we've heard of Leslie Headland, of how connected it actually is. I wonder how involved Charles Soule is in this show, in the Acolyte, because again, he's been in talks with Undiscovered Country, with again some of his other creator owned. I think Letter 44 is always in some sort of development for a TV show, TV adaptation. These are adaptations of his comic books, so it's a little different, but still, he's in the TV world. And at what point does he really make the transition? I think we've been calling for this for years, but for him and Claudia Gray to actually write scripts.
If they want to.
But like, I mean, you want to talk about characters or writers who move between media. I mean, writing a novel versus writing a comic book is very different. It's not drastically different, but different enough, versus writing an audio play. So of course it is a script. Both, that Kevin Scott and George Mann have both done brilliantly with. And the Ahsoka, or not the Ahsoka, the Afra audio play was pretty good too. And this one has some really great moments. I forget, like Sarah Kuhn wrote that one. And so, yeah, I mean, these folks, they know story. I keep on saying Charles Soule is the master of setup and payoff. They understand how story works. At what point does Charles Soule get to write a Kira story for the screen? Maybe more like, here's the thing, her story has developed more in the comic, so maybe there's an easier jump than to say a novel. We know E.K. Johnston is writing a younger Kira novel. Sorry, so I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. I'm less concerned about all that than you. I think the question you're getting at is, where is it okay for the character to die off? I'm okay with a character like Kira dying in a novel. You talk about this guy here and how Charles Soule wrote the end of phase 1 in a comic book. I think that was a bit of a scheduling thing. That was kind of weird, but also it really underscored. I think it really worked in that it underscored the cliffhanger nature of the end of phase 1. So,
I guess for me, Marchion's a different story because he is a paper first and foremost character. Kira started in the movies.
Yeah,
I know some people were still. I know some. I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I wish Asajj Ventress had lived. So I think she would have been great in some dark time storytelling. Not gonna lie. I think she would have been fascinating to see her deal with the darkness in the Empire. Funny enough, she didn't die in Legends. She actually lived in Legends, and we never knew what happened to her in the dark.
What are we talking about? Sorry,
Asajj Ventress.
Asajj, yeah.
Ventress.
Yeah.
And I know that like the characters like had 7 seasons of Clone Wars TV, and then I know some people are getting like, oh, she died in a book. Like, died in a book.
She didn't die in a book. She died in planned Clone Wars episodes, guys.
I know, but like, couldn't you have not written it and then just hope to leave it open? Like,
I guess because they could have given that the Siege of Mandalore treatment too.
It would have been like if Ahsoka decide, oh, you know what, she died in a book. Like, instead of going to Rebels. Although I guess maybe Filoni had just more creative control over his character.
I mean, so good.
And I guess that is sort of more the fanish mentality of like, should we strive for egalitarianism, or is there kind of always going to be this kind of unofficial hierarchy where, like, if let's say Vernestra dies in Acolyte, I don't know why. I mean, none of these characters have to die, by the way, if they show up. Like, they can live. Like, I feel like the whole death thing is sort of like just
the Game of Thrones thing got overblown. Game of Thrones.
Oh, you got shit. But if she did die in Acolyte, for whatever reason, if it's a good reason, I'm honestly more okay with that. Because, like, hey, she gotta have a big moment in which is looking to be a pretty epic TV show, which I think is gonna have. I think is gonna be big. So it's sort of like she gets to have a bit of a moment in the sun, compared to like if I don't know, if like George Lucas had decided after Empire, like, I'm gonna make Return of the Jedi a comic book instead and kill everyone off. They're all dead. Here's a comic. End of my trilogy. 2 epic movies.
I mean, that would have been extreme. I don't know.
I mean, it's an extreme thing. And to be fair, we haven't done these extreme things, and when we do end a character, like permanently end a character.
Yeah.
It's more and more has been the, I guess, promotion. Like, I think Thrawn's gonna die in the Filoni movie. I think that's kind of his last command moment. Yeah. But so
artistically done.
Artistically done moment. But it's gonna be in a big blockbuster movie. So he's gonna have his moment in the sun again. Compared to like if it was the reverse. Like outside of, I mean, really only outside of Ventress, which was more of a weird fluky thing, if you ask me. And I guess since Kira lived, we didn't have to do. We haven't done this again, where characters start off in the more mainstream medium and then permanently ended in something smaller, like a comic or something.
Yeah. But her story in the comic is bigger. That's the thing.
That's true.
Like, we get a lot more of her in the comic, so
that's true. I mean, she didn't, and thankfully she didn't die, so she's
true too.
She's gonna be, if the character wants to keep going, like, everyone's gonna die eventually,
And except for Ahsoka. I think she's eternal. But that's
All right, Ahsoka's eternal. We all know that.
Yeah.
She's gonna go to Mortis and live out her days.
Yeah.
Off the board. But I think that's kind of the question of the. I guess maybe unofficially or even officially, there are certain parameters.
Yeah.
I do think if there is one parameter, I was watching somebody else's podcast kind of talk about recently. If you read the Star Wars timeline book, they just say Cad Bane was out of commission. I do think if there is kind of an unspoken rule, with maybe some exceptions like High Republic, which I think Acolyte might be more the exception, not the rule for a lot of these things. Maybe I will have to see in the future. Obviously, because we're still. It's kind of weird to say this. We're still kind of in the early phases of screen media. And I think, compared to Marvel, where there's like 21 movies, or 100, I don't know. I've lost count. It's like
not counting the MCU, not just the MCU, but
no, if we do count the MCU, there's a lot of MCU movies.
Coming up to 25, yeah.
Where still on screen, we're still in like the baby phases of Disney Plus, and we have only done like 5 films. So they haven't we still haven't kind of seen where this could go in next decade or so. Like what kind of Acolyte might be the first or the only exception, not the rule for now. Until
in terms of tying in, so you mean in terms of tying into a paper story?
In terms of tying in, and also my point that I was going to make, which is I don't think paper is allowed to really confine or define things for screen. But I think screen is totally okay with defining and confining things paper can do.
Yeah, so, it's not a two-way. It's not a reciprocal.
No
thing. Or like I was saying at the top, paper can define and confine to some extent, but then a screen story can come along and negate that or change that or add a wrinkle to that, right? I mean, the Canon comic is still there. It still works with what we see in Bad Batch. The Ahsoka novel, some things don't quite work with what we see in Clone Wars and Tales of the Jedi, but by and large, the idea is there. I will say, I do want to get to the point about characters dying off, though. And the reason Ventress, and this gets to my point with Ahsoka before, the reason Ventress worked so well for me is because both Christy Golden and Katie Lucas did such a fantastic job leading us into that story, and such a beautiful story with Quinlan, with Dooku, that it was so rich and really brought her to her fulfillment, brought her back to the Jedi Order. And we really feel that. And so whether it's in a novel or in a novel adaptation of scripts or in the animated thing we see, the animated show that we see, again, if it's well done in a compelling, well-written way, I think that'll still feel earned. And that's the real question. And so maybe again, I'm less worried about than you are. Maybe I'm, again, the Avengers to me doesn't, even if it were an original novel, it wouldn't have necessarily bothered me as much. So we'll see with Vernestra. There's another thing with Vernestra. It's interesting. Similar to Ahsoka, we've only seen her younger years, and in this medium, we've only seen her as a new knight who thinks higher of herself than she really is in a young reader novel and a young adult novel, or young reader novels and a young adult novel, and some other media. I think in some comics too, but we haven't seen her as an older character. It is this interesting parallel with Ahsoka, right? That we see her as this older character, wizened, more experienced, live action. And maybe that's where we talk about media and what I was saying before about a more playful, fun, maybe less serious, but in a good way, animated media. I mean, even the young reader novels have pictures in them. We see her with her light whip and all that. in the still that was leaked around that we showed and we got flagged for, hooray. She's bald and she's wearing these robes and she's in her 30s or 40s or however old she is, and
hundreds
or hundreds or whatever, however old Mirallans are.
140s, looking good.
Yeah, clearly being through some stuff, just like with Ahsoka. When I'm pushing redacted ears. I'm a different person than I was 10 years ago. If someone, my life 10, 20 years ago would be a young adult novel, and my life now would hopefully be a more grown-up novel or live action story. Hopefully, maybe not, but it depends on how much those memories connect. And of course, as we grow older, we have a healthier recollection. If we mature, healthy recollection of those memories. And so you can have live action does allow for those layers to be more explored more fully. That's interesting. That's the thing with both Ahsoka. We see that in Clone Wars, the series, how she's able to be more layered and more self-aware and self-understanding. She's not Snips anymore. She's Ahsoka Tano. Vernestra isn't Vern. She tries to say, I'm Vernestra. It'll be interesting, actually. I wonder if she's more comfortable with being called Vern in this, in the Acolyte. But really, she's Vern. she's this 16-year-old knighted way too soon. Now she's Master Vernestra Rowe and in the Acolyte. And yeah, I'm very curious. She's going to be a secondary character, but curious to see the way the live action medium is able to explore that darker, more authoritative Jedi Master.
Yeah, and also back to High Republic when I was talking about, defined and confined.
Mm-hmm.
High Republic is also an exception to the rule because the books did define what the era is supposed to be about. Gold robes, the height of the Jedi power, kind of that sort of thing. It is defining what Acolyte is going to essentially build off of.
And Jedi Survivor with the gold robes.
Where normally it's the reverse, where the movies or TV shows tends to define what the era is, and then the books kind of follow suit with like the sequels and Rogue One. I guess that's the case, the original trilogy, the prequels. It's like I'm thinking also about. I keep thinking about Ahsoka again because that's the one where it's like. It also it's like how exposition-y or are they just gonna get cut brass tacks and just see Ahsoka thinking about her master and it's Anakin Skywalker, hopefully played by Hayden Christensen if we get some new footage or flashback, cross fingers, and just audiences are gonna be like, hey, it's that guy. I didn't know they that guy, and it's like just like just go for it, and I feel like Kenobi is sort of our best kind of look at kind of what Ahsoka will be like, and Book of Boba Fett to a smaller degree. Where it's sort of like, well, Kenobi is a continuation of 3 films. They just flashed it previously on the prequel trilogy.
It isn't like you were talking about the thing at the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
that's not a previous film. That's a prologue. But
prologue, the prequel trilogy, and then it just gets into it. Here are the Inquisitors. No explanation, just bad guys. Yeah. And maybe that is what you do. Maybe it's like you don't. Maybe it's like maybe sometimes you do need to have some exposition. Like it's like if Sabine's asked who was the bearded person and the kind of the gothy person. It's like they're bad people. I'm fighting them,
especially if they're newer characters, right? That isn't harking back to any kind of backstory. We don't even know. You and I don't even know who those guys are.
That's true. I'd be, and maybe, and as for someone like Thrawn, I do kind of wonder how you reintroduce Thrawn via rebels, and kind of just like, oh, he's a Grand Admiral. Why does Thrawn want to be the heir to the Empire? Like, how do you kind of reintroduce that? Like, I do wonder, like, even watching that scene in Mandalorian season 10, which I like, because I like seeing just how the Empire works. I do wonder, though, how that scene works for someone who has no idea what's going on. It's like we're looking at Moff Gideon. It's like, Grand Admiral, who now? It's like, who's Thrawn? Like, clearly there's something important, but like, does it come off confusing or intriguing? I mean, I don't know. I don't have a point of reference, because you and I both know who Thrawn is quite well.
We also know who Brendel Hux is, and we know who Pelion is, and
right. I mean, probably no one knows who Pelion or Brendel. Well, probably they somewhat familiar with that name, Hux.
General Hugs.
They probably don't know who Pelion is or why this. I mean, I think in the scene itself, it's like Imperial officer dude who's just talking about this Grand Admiral dude. But I do wonder if kind of the weight behind that scene is like intriguing or confusing. I'm very curious. I would love to talk to someone who doesn't know.
So good.
Who doesn't keep up with everything and just watching The Mandalorian, and it's like, Grand Admiral, who now? And it's like, obviously, I think Ahsoka's going to put more of the emphasis on why Thrawn's important. But I'm curious, like, how it does that with keeping the weight of the character, and just in terms of Rebels. I'm not even going to get into the books and stuff like that, which we talked about. It's going to probably be its own thing. Just the Imperial bad guy. Why is he a threat?
I think, but here's the thing: is Giancarlo Esposito's performance in that, the score, the filming, everything about that, the set design. Even if you don't know who these people are, you feel it. You feel what's happening here. There's this thing about this empire. You maybe have a sense, okay, it's the Shattered Empire, or it was the Palpatine thing. Now they're gone. Unless you have to keep explaining the timeline, which is fine, whatever. But you feel like this is the big bad. They're jockeying for position. You get that sense, and that's what I'm saying is with Vernestra, with Ahsoka. You don't necessarily need to explain everything if you communicate the things that aren't spoken and aren't said really well in the things that are, because Moff Gideon doesn't need to know who Thrawn is. He already knows who Thrawn is. He doesn't need to know who Brendel Hux is. He already knows who Brendel Hux is. So, we had to learn who Moff Gideon was because he was a new character. But yeah, again, I think it's all in how the story in the present is told in ways that are more universal and common in our culture, and what a villain is, what a calculating, impressive villain like Thrawn is. The way he comes out. Even Kevin Kiner's music. I mean, that was a great point. The organ, a very distinctive theme, really helps us feel who this character is, and I can't wait for that theme to come back in its own way too. So you get a live action organ going on.
We're talking about new characters. I do wonder if, again, through Ahsoka, we'll learn about Thrawn through these new villains. We have, I mean, I would kind of forget this, but outside of the magistrate woman from the Ahsoka episode, we only saw for like a few minutes, so she's not bad. She's not that new, but through these new, Thrawn will know who. I mean, Ahsoka will know who Thrawn is, but I wonder, and I hope we have scenes independent of Ahsoka with these new villains who probably are going to be kind of like Reva in that they are main characters in their own right. But it's called Ahsoka, but I think it'll be somewhat of a ensemble piece for sure.
Yeah, it'll be a way of masking exposition through character moments, and that's of course how you do it properly.
Yeah, because we'll learn about what do they want, and then obviously why all three of them are loyal to Thrawn, or what we think are loyal to Thrawn, at least. And then maybe it's sort of like a dichotomy thing where it's like we kind of know Ahsoka through the Mandalorian, so we're kind of following the weird alien lady who knows the powers. If you're just a Mando fan, and then through her, Ahsoka will be reintroduced to the Ghost crew. Like, oh, here's some people she knows, and then maybe it's like, oh, they're not happy with her for some reason. Wonder why. And then obviously we'll learn about Ezra and stuff like that, and through these new villains, we'll learn about Thrawn again and why he is important, and then obviously why.
There's things we don't know about Thrawn, at least in screen canon. You know, all he does, he just drops in, tries to toys with the rebels. What's his face? I'm talking about in the Rebels, not the finale, but the season 3 finale.
The
Admiral, what is it? Constantine, breaks off and ruins everything. So this thing, I mean, again, you can read this on novels. To what extent those are going to count, we don't know. Probably not much, but there's more for us to learn about Thrawn as well.
I feel like this is turned into a discussion about just how to do exposition.
It is. Well, it's a discussion on how to go back from a story from a previous medium.
I mean, and that actually kind of adds a new point. Which I don't have on the note, but you brought it up.
Yeah,
is kind of, I mean, I always say the film, every story to a certain extent should always stand on its own. Even a sequel, obviously a sequel, the continuation, but Empire Strikes Back, still a good movie on its own. It's obviously enhanced when you watch New Hope, and then when you get the prequels on, But you look at stuff like when new additional things are brought into from other media. I never begrudge anyone who wants to feel something for it. I do think, maybe when you're making your argument, you have to remember not everyone is going to be tapping into it. Right. But, I'll use Starkiller Base as kind of a good example. Starkiller Base in Force Awakens, just another Death Star. It's bigger. It does something and it gets destroyed.
It's bigger and more intense.
Like most of the First Order. But ultimately, retroactively, they made it Ilum and kind of created this weird little through line of like, poor Ilum, the home of Jedi Kyber crystals, gets corrupted and just massacred boy into Starkiller Base and then gets destroyed. And I guess I am always kind of curious how do we discuss this among, I mean, against the layman, I don't know, the normies, whatever.
I know what you mean, the Muggles.
Regular folk.
Yeah.
Because ultimately in Force Awakens, I still think Starkiller Base is kind of lame, kind of just Death Star again.
Yeah,
can't help ourselves. But I also do like the Ilum subplot, even though it's has nothing to do in the movie. But I guess it's more of I guess that's when personal choices come. It's like I get to decide what's important to me. Yeah. And if I want to look at Starkiller Base, it's like not Ilum, no, they do to Ilum. Then I guess that's my choice. But I'll let you kind of respond.
I mean, that's a great example. First of all, because it's a blinking you'll miss. It's confirmed in a blinking you'll miss it moment in Jedi Fallen Order, where you have to go back to the planet to see. If anything, where might they actually dive into that is Ahsoka, because at this point it's undergoing its corruption, decay into ultimately we don't know how far along. Is there enough Imperial authority there to actually do something? But clearly, by the end of by 20 some odd years later, it's a planned destroying weapon. We have the droid again, blanking on his name. What's the droid's name?
Hu Yang.
We have Hu Yang, who we first encounter on a trip to Ilum with Ahsoka and Yoda and the younglings, and maybe they'll dive into that a little more. We know, again, it's going to go into more Jedi mysticism. I mean, that's the thing is nerdy lore, geeky lore it's part of the genre, first of all. The live action series haven't gone into it as much. Clone Wars went into it plenty with Ilum and Hu Yang and all that. Yeah, I mean, even with the Darksaber, right? We got that beautiful animation in Rebels that we only got kind of an exposition version of that in Mandalorian. I can see Ahsoka. I can see them going into it if it is clear again. This is broken record, and this is what I'm gonna keep saying. It's clear what the character motivations are in the present. It's
Exactly.
clear
Exactly.
why I, Ahsoka Tano, in right now with this in all my life experiences, care about this planet that is part from my childhood and from my me training up kids way back when, because it is a symbol. I mean, that's the thing where we latch on to Ilum becoming Starkiller is a symbol of how the Jedi have been replaced by the Empire and the First Order. As because that's the thing is as the ultimate force in the galaxy, as the great protectors of peace and justice, the great guardians of peace and justice, people looked to the Jedi. They believed in the Force, and now they look to the Empire, and they believe in fear. And it's a Jedi, but it's also the rebellion overall that helped save the day. They're still fighting for that in this time period, and again, Ahsoka is struggling to find her place in this time period as an inheritor, an heir to the Jedi. I know it's a novel that didn't go so well, but an heir to the Jedi, just like Thrawn is an heir to the Empire. Can she sit with that? Especially Luke is definitely on his way trying to rebuild the Order. We know what happens with him, as we saw in The Last Jedi. Of course, we know Rey and her film is coming up down the pike. If that's going to at least tie in thematically, yeah, I think they can go into these things a lot more. I'm basically, my bottom line is I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and give them some credit to know how to handle the different levels of things. I think Mandalorian has done such a great job, especially with Bo-Katan, in handling these different levels of what is her legacy and relationship with leading Mandalore and with her sister and her house. Having the Darksaber and losing it, not believing in the story, the Darksaber being destroyed. What does that mean? Similar to Ilum being destroyed. So,
right.
I
I think you said it pretty much. Lore serves the story, never other way around.
Absolutely,
like
yeah.
what is the story in the present? It's like I feel like I don't know. There's like different discussions, but this is from my basic class. I always feel like when we talk about things we want to see, I always feel like we want lore more than we want story. Like, how did Snoke come about? How did Snoke take over the First Order? Like, I want to know that story.
We want
history,
like, well, yeah.
I mean, I like history too. Don't get me wrong. I got a bunch of history books behind me. Yeah. But it's like that. What is the story part?
Mm-hmm.
What is the motivations, or like. I mean, if you want to tell a historical Star Wars story, be my guest, man. That would sound epic. But it's like, what is Snoke's motivation? What's the core? Where is his struggles? Where is his arc? Getting back to Thrawn, it's like, what are the arcs and the stories of these new villains? Are they just we serve Thrawn, all hail, or it's like, is Shin kind of the young one? Because I feel like is she like a Reva type who's like, she's dealing with trauma and struggles of her own, trying to find, is Balin like, is Ahsoka trying to find out, I am no Jedi. Balin's like, I'm no Jedi either. It's time we create something new and more interesting and unique. And Thrawn is like, kind of, what are the key, like, that is their story is like, it's about a guy who lost his faith and just turned to a different path. So the human stories, I like to say, is
if the Chisra Togruta story. I will say one thing, the counterpoint to that though is none of us exist in a vacuum, and none of these characters exist in a vacuum. That history matters because it affects where we are in the present, right? I'm sitting here in the present because of a long history that came before me, I mean, involving involving the long 20th century. You know, so I mean, what we saw with Rey and Luke with the Jedi, the history of the Jedi, how do they inherit that history and pass it on? Becomes a deeply personal story for Rey, who are my parents. Where is my place in all this? For Ahsoka, it's a both end, and it's not just a both end; it's interconnected, intertwined. Can we start again? Can we rebuild this order? Am I obliged because I'm someone with such wisdom and power to somehow? What does it mean for me to serve the light in serving the wider galaxy? Because that has always been Ahsoka, right? Does it mean going back to the legacy of the Jedi? For Luke, it does. For Ahsoka, maybe more than we think, and we'll see.
Sorry, my cat is. There we go.
The cat has made an appearance. There we go.
Exactly. Again, sorry if I keep turning this into like Ahsoka speculation, but like my brain, as I feel like Ahsoka is sort of the epitome of the multimedia topic. Maybe not as extreme though as like if it's been a comic book character. I'm really waiting for the day when Dr. Aphra finally makes the jump and we get a Dr. Aphra TV show that's predicated it's just like here's Dr. Aphra now in this part
or
of
an
life.
Appearance in something like a cameo, just like Chrysanthemum.
I mean, I want to get a whole freaking show. I think he deserves that.
It's a matter of time. It's almost surprising it hasn't happened already.
Yeah, but back to Ahsoka. I am very curious. To me, Ahsoka and Kenobi feel like almost cousin series in a weird way. Maybe because they're both about the space wizards, and they're both characters kind of predicated with history already.
Yeah.
Both
Jedi specifically. Yeah.
Both Jedi and character. I mean,
and with connections to Anakin.
And well, that's what I was gonna say. Is Anakin Ahsoka's Qui-Gon? Is that sort of her last kind of hurdle she needs to overcome?
Maybe.
Where she stands with her former master, who the last time she saw eyes on him, he was ready for murder. He was not in there.
And the reason she doesn't want to train Grogu, as I said.
And it's like, but Anakin's now can be force ghosty maybe, and he has been, he's been dead now for a couple of years. So I'm just kind of curious about that, and just curious to see again. But I think we're almost done with the topic. Just kind of one final thing is like, I think the Bad Batch kind of Canon thing and the Ahsoka Tale of the Jedi thing, they're weird, just adaptations, and Star Wars doesn't really do adaptations for sure. So they're wrinkles. I don't think they're as big a deal as some people make them out to be, if I'm going to be quite perfectly honest. But they don't even stuff like Cobb Vance's backstory. Like in the book, he didn't like Tuskens, but in the movie, he didn't like.
Those are little details.
Those are little details. They don't that matter. But the broad strokes are still the same. He's a guy who got Boba's armor.
I just want to answer Sam's question here. I mean the novel does go into a lot more, but it's a specific story of her on this planet with these sisters that were the Empire's exploiting. The big difference is when she meets up with Bail Organa and becomes Fulcrum, but again, it's not that big of a deal. So,
it's not
because there's also an encounter with an Inquisitor, and
so that's kind of the only thing about multimedia. Kind of, they'll make changes when they have to make changes. Obviously,
I guess to actually answer your question, now that I read it, in the official telling of her life, both versions are right, because they're not. It's a fictional story, but also there's room for kind of a. My point being, there's room for kind of a wrinkle in, what we see and what we know. They don't really contradict.
No, I mean, I don't want to get. We did a whole episode about like authors, kind of just
Yeah.
and the consistency authors bring. Like like Cobb Vance hasn't had a consistent author. He's like Chuck Wendig and then John Favreau. And then like you got bigger characters like Tim Zahn and Thrawn for sure, where there's interesting kind of wrinkles for sure if you really want to boil it down. But yeah, I mean that's all I really got to say. But I think that's kind of the broad stroke.
I'll say this is the most important point. We saw her gain her footing, as Sticksboy here is saying. Gain her footing, growing up, becoming that more layered character that we see in season 7 and in season 5, but then in season 7 and then in Rebels. And so it's all gonna come. I don't think she's gonna die. I think she's an eternal character. I think there's something different and new that's gonna happen with her, but
I kind of like
it's going to be this live action. It's going to be a culmination of how she understands her destiny. That began with season 5.
Yeah, and I kind of want part of the story to be her kind of figuring out why I am even here. Why am I alive?
Yeah, after Mortis,
why am I in the
not after Mortis, after World Between Worlds. I mean, it began with season 1, but we really start to really come together in season 5.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, I think that's gonna do it for the conversation. I think I've gone over everything in my notes about Star Wars, the multimedia. I think it's interesting. I think you brought up the interesting point. I think the most interesting point you brought up. I brought up a lot of interesting points.
I do my best. I try.
Yes, is sort of the idea of like what's sort of the default Star Wars story, the place to tell stories. I think everyone's got their personal thing. I think to people, Star Wars is always going to be the default shit. Like I think people have their opinions on what they think the default story should be. And I say default story, I don't mean the Skywalker saga. I mean like no, the place to tell Star Wars first and foremost should always be films. I'm going to be honest. I still think we are going to get back to that in terms of the general trends.
It's the event. The on Saturday, what I experienced, the film event.
But, and I think we're gonna get more of that. I mean, the writer's strike might cause some delays. Obviously, I don't mind. I want them writers to get what they're just dues and get their ways because they should. But I do think I think we are going to slowly get back there. I think maybe Lucasfilm themselves might be pushed to get them back there, where I think maybe before they were okay with letting films kind of fall out. Like, no, we're good here in Disney Plus land. We're happy. We feel safe. Like it.
That sounds like a great episode. We could do another podcast on sometime.
Maybe.
I think we sort of tried to tonight, but it's a great episode topic sometime.
Yeah, but I think be it the big overlords of Disney or themselves are gonna be like, nope, time to get out the blanket, get into the theater, whether united or not. But I think regardless, I think we'll get there sooner. But yeah, I think I think to Star Wars, it's gonna be different. And I'll leave it off with this. Years ago on the Jedi Council forums, I saw someone and they said something really fascinating. Where to them, Star Wars was this big book series that just had films to it. And at the end of the day, pick your own personal Star Wars, people. That's all we can say. If your Star Wars is just book to you, then enjoy them books. Enjoy the toy, enjoy the video games. I hope they make more video games because that's something that Star Wars probably should have more of. But yeah,
I guess the thing flies. This thing doesn't need to.
Star Wars is toys to be something for collection. So yeah, that's kind of my final say.
Yeah,
that
I'm liking what they're doing with live action Disney Plus. Obviously, I'm loving High Republic, but we're all gonna have different opinions. It's true. That's fair. In my opinion, it's a great time to wrap things up.
Exactly.
There we go. 2 hours. It's all right. 2 hours, a little conversation of Obva Disney Plus show and everything they can fit into it. Just putting that out there. Just getting the last word in there. Thanks everyone for joining us. Conversations in the comments. Let us know what you thought of the conversation tonight. Again, the comments sections are not going anywhere in these videos on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Twitter. Different accounts there. But do please follow us. Let us know on Twitter and Instagram at Ion Canon Pod. I'll do this here on the Ion Canon Pod, EYEONCANONPOD, or on the Star Wars Underworld Facebook page, here on the YouTube page as well. Please do give this video a like and a share. Subscribe to all those channels and platforms if you haven't done so already. Joel, where can they find you on Hear This in Your Internet?
You can find me at JID2021 to get JID2021 on Twitter. You can also follow me at the Ion Canon Pod, where I will always post things and questions and interesting, sometimes even polls. If you want to vote now, but we don't have a poll right now. And also, of course, Discord. You can follow us at the SW Discord. We're playing Apex Friday, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
I love democracy. Vote in polls. You can follow me on Twitter at NEUG45, where NEUG485, where there's a poll up that has nothing to do with Star Wars, but something I'm just personally curious about. On Twitter, or that's on Twitter, on Instagram at MNEUG1138, and of course at Ion Canon Pod as well. Next week we're taking a break because, like I said, I'm going to be on a jet plane Friday. I'm going to be out of town, so we're taking a little bit of a break. But then we'll be right back at it a week later, talking all about the lore and canon and hierarchy and the galaxy far, far away. But until then, Joel, let's blow this thing and head home.